Good morning. I just have to say, yippee! And also, a more theologically appropriate grace and peace to you from the one who gives us life and transformation. I have to say, this morning, I feel like, and if I burst into tears at some point, it could happen, but I feel like I'm sort of in a movie that has flashbacks. So, 60 years ago, I stood in this chancel, along with, we just discovered, with Sue Tong. Here we were, 60 years ago. And it was confirmed by Pastors Stone and Al Stone and David Ongersbach. And to be honest, it's frankly hard to remember the girl that I was then. Although I remember wearing my first pair of high heels, and probably almost my last pair of high heels. I don't think I ever got them after that. And I could hardly walk. I mean, insane. I looked like I was, like 10 or something. But anyway, and I also remember that Pastor Stone was a man of intellect, and I expect he might have been one of those ones that planted in me the idea that faith and knowledge could be companions. I will save some of my memories of shenanigans in this sanctuary for another time. 55 years ago, I occasionally sat in these pews, again, as a student at the University of Washington, where Lutheran campus ministry, under the leadership of Bill Hershey and Jean Raywinkle, who many of you knew, changed the direction of my life forever. Absolutely. From Bill, I learned that faith and liberation were companions. I may sound really old, but I am not as old as Jack and Lowell, so. They said I could say that, but okay. It's fine to be old. It's fine. It's good. So it's something for me to be here in this pulpit in 2022. And I remember learning in confirmation, we had to learn these O words, like omnipotent and omniscient. I still remember the book. And one of those words was omniscient, that God was omniscient, all-knowing. And with my current theological viewpoint, I really doubt even God would have imagined this in 1962. So, here I am, and here you are, you online as well, you in the sanctuary, to travel together for a bit, along with others on the interim team, Pastors Gary and Tim, and I am excited. The church and the world is in a time of enormous change. We will learn from each other and hopefully lean into that emerging future with hope. None of us can navigate this time on our own. God has given us to each other to be companions on a journey. In our gospel text today from Luke, we also meet some people on their way, some travelers. They're characters in a parable that Jesus tells to the lawyer who wanting to follow that commandment to love God and neighbor. He wants to know, and precisely, who is my neighbor? He wants probably some limits on that category. So like you would have two columns, and person there, neighbor, not neighbor. You don't want to waste your time and money on the wrong person, right? So I expect this story, if you've been going to church over the years, this story is pretty familiar, right? A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell into the hands of robbers who stripped him and beat him and left him half dead. And we know nothing about this man, his ethnic or religious background, his character, or his personal history. He was just a man who was mugged. And if we had to categorize him, he was a man in need. So Jesus tells us there's a priest going down the road also, and he was probably on his way home after serving at the temple in Jerusalem, a religious leader type like those of us wearing robes here. And when he saw the man lying on the road, he, probably looked like he could be dead. So if so, he would have been in that category of unclean. And touching him would have made the priest unclean. So he couldn't take a chance, and better to pass by on the other side of the road. And then sometime later, Jesus tells us a Levite who, he came down the road. He was someone who assisted the priest, so not quite as important, but still someone who would be concerned about religious purity. So he too passed by on the other side. And for the Levite and the priest, the first and main issue that confronted them when they saw the half-dead man beside the road was this: how to categorize him. Was he Jewish? Was he dead or alive? Was he someone who met the laws for who they could associate with? If it wasn't clear how to classify him according to such terms, then they'd better steer clear to be safe. The first issue was not the man's need. But then a Samaritan traveler passes by. Samaritans were used to being outside the boundaries. While they shared many things in common with Jews, they were also, and they shared the same scriptures, they also worshiped in a different way. And Jews would not associate with Samaritans. So when the Samaritan came upon the injured man, he saw first a person in need. That was the primary category for classification, not what kind of threat the injured man might pose, or whether the Samaritan, was ritually pure, or his, and so on. Because of his need, the man who had been mugged was the Samaritan's neighbor, and because he was a neighbor, he was someone that God required him to love. And love in this case is action. It's not an emotional feeling. It wasn't important to Jesus what kind of feelings the Samaritan had for the man who had been mugged, but rather that he acted with compassion and mercy. And that's what love is in a biblical sense. I think this gospel lesson today gives us one of the Bible's most comprehensive answers to the basic religious question: how is it that God would have us live in relationship to God and to one another? Love God and love your neighbor, or to be more specific, love God and love the one in need as yourself. This message is the basis for the ethical life. And as Lutherans, it's the cornerstone of our work through the service and justice ministries of our church. World hunger, advocacy, support for refugees and for immigrants. Incredibly simple. Love God, care for the one in need. We could learn this in kindergarten, right? Yet also incredibly difficult. Neither are easy because of our self-centeredness. In theological sense, we're sinful human beings who need God's grace again and again to save us, to rescue us. But there's another difficulty as well, and what makes our responding to the one in need complex sometimes is that there are so many people in need. So I can find the story of the Good Samaritan overwhelming in some ways. Who's my neighbor today, Jesus? I don't need to even walk out my door to see those in need, those who have been mugged in one way or another by our society. I meet those in need when I open the paper in the morning while I'm having my coffee, and when I sit down to supper in front of the news hour. The media has brought those people into my condo in Everett. There's no need even to walk across the street to the Salvation Army or venture out into the alleys around my home. You know what I mean, right? What neighbors have you encountered in the past couple weeks that have broken your heart? I'm thinking probably firstly of ones that we've maybe don't know personally, but there may also be personally people that you've encountered. But I'm thinking of that, 2-year-old whose parents were both shot at the parade on Monday, the 4th of July parade. I'm still thinking of that family of Jayland Walker, an unarmed black man shot 60 times by the police in Akron, Ohio. The families of the immigrants left to die in that semi in San Antonio. The women who have lost their reproductive rights and choices with the overturn of Roe v. Wade. Or maybe someone living on the streets not far away. If we have our eyes and ears open, even if we never leave the house, we see and hear too much. And the needs are overwhelming. It sometimes feels like a fire hose. So when I ponder this gospel story, I first need to receive it in the context of God's grace and love. But second, I need to think about it collectively, okay? That's one of my themes. We are not individuals. We're a community. So we're not lone Samaritans. We are Samaritans together. When we encounter a person who's been robbed and beaten up in one way or another, we respond not only as individuals, but as part of a community. And that's really what it means to be the church, at least part of what it means. We serve as neighbors to those in need, but still, even as a group, we can't even begin to meet the needs of so many who have been beaten up and robbed in the present or in the past, as we are well aware of. I think the parable itself, though, actually gives us a couple hints about how to approach this dilemma, about even though it's set in a context so far different than our own. And the first hint, I think, is, what's our location? What do we see right around us, right around this church? And also, what are the immediate connections that we have to neighbors in far away places? As this congregation has had with the Ilinga Lutheran Junior Seminary, and others as well. And the Spirit opens up pathways for connection if we stay awake and open. Then there's another hint. The second hint that can help our discernment is what resources do we have to bring to the situation? The Samaritan had an animal that could carry the one who'd been beaten and robbed. He had some money to pay the innkeeper, and most of all, perhaps he had compassion that he was willing to act on. So our location, our connections, our resources help us discern the way that we can be neighbors to one another and to others, the neighbor that's in need. So I know none of this is new to this congregation. You have had much experience over many, many decades of discerning who is your neighbor. Given your location, your connections, your resources, your compassion. I know a little bit about that. I not only have a historic relationship to this congregation, but I was the pastor over it. I came to St. John, then it became St. John United, the same year that Pastor Ron came here and sort of went through the beginnings of Elizabeth Gregory, and so I'm aware of some of the journey of this congregation. So I want to learn more, and I also want to learn, what things do you see emerging? What new neighbors do you see out around you? New needs. In my dialogue with this parable the past week, there's been another question to ponder, and that is, how are we sustained? How are we sustained for this work of caring for our neighbor? That is a big one. We're in a hard time. People are tired. Events around us from daily, it seems, gun violence to, in my view, frightening Supreme Court decisions, they can just suck the life out of us. I found it hard to celebrate the 4th of July last Monday when it seemed to me like our nation is coming apart. I feel like if we're paying attention, even those of us with relatively comfortable lives, I sometimes feel like traumatized. How much worse it is for all those who've been marginalized by poverty and injustice of one kind or another. So we come to this weekly gathering, whether in person or online, we come with needs ourselves. We may feel beat up, robbed in one way or another, or maybe we are just tired. So we come together for comfort and healing from God and from one another. We come to be fed with the word and the meal. We come to find hope and joy in one another's presence. One of my favorite scripture passages is from 1 Kings 19. I actually saw this on a Facebook post like just a couple days ago. But it's the one where the angel of God comes to Elijah when Elijah's life has been threatened and he thinks he might be killed. And the angel says, "Get up and eat. Otherwise the journey will be too much for you." Yeah. Get up and eat, So we eat here in the pews now because of COVID. We eat. We share the food that is the word, the food that is the holy meal. And the food is our everyday food. So we're fed by word, by meal, by relationships, and those we've encountered on the road, so that we can go out and be neighbors once again. So we're going to share the rhythms of this journey for a while. I am grateful for this partnership. May God bless our time together. Amen.